and welcome to the Better Man Clinics, the podcast where we talk to actual experts to address the questions that men want answered, but are either too embarrassed to ask or simply don't know who to ask. Before we get started, I do want to caution that the conversations on this podcast are for informational purposes only. They don't represent a medical consultation, nor do they present medical advice to individuals. Rather, we hope that the podcast empowers men with the knowledge and confidence to address these issues with their healthcare providers. As with any medical or wellness issues, you should always consult with your healthcare provider before beginning any type of treatment or preventative intervention. With that being said, in today's episode, we discuss the relationship between diet and energy. According to a survey performed last year, 60% of Americans, adults, feel more tired now than they have ever felt. While a lot of this fatigue is rightfully attributed to lack of sleep, stress, and our generally hectic lifestyles, what is often ignored is the significant impact that our diet has on our energy levels. As we learn in this episode, what we eat has a tremendous impact on how we feel, particularly when it comes to our energy levels. Helping us to understand this relationship is nutritionist Christina Stapke. Christina is a board-certified and licensed integrative and functional dietitian. One of her areas of expertise is actually helping her clients evaluate and adjust their diets to improve and maintain their energy levels. And now, without further ado, I bring you our conversation with Christina Stapke about diet and energy levels. And welcome to Better Man Clinics. Today we're going to be discussing the relationship between diet and energy. And that's a pretty important topic because, as we all can agree, we are busier than ever running around. And most of us can admit that, we might get a little bit more tired than we thought we did in the past. In fact, a recent study showed that about 60% of Americans feel that they are more tired today than they've ever been. So what can we attribute all this fatigue to? Well, some of us will say maybe it's that extra Netflix episode we try to cram in the late evening and sacrifice a little bit of sleep. Others will say maybe it's all of this stress about COVID or my job or family. Or maybe it's just that we really are just running around and taking on too much on ourselves. But one cause that rarely comes up is your diet. Yeah, sure. We all try to sneak in an extra coffee or a soda or an energy drink to give us a little boost, or think that we're giving ourselves a little boost in the middle of the day. But what about every day? How does our diet really impact our energy levels or lack thereof? To help us tackle those questions, we are fortunate enough to have Christina Stapke, an actual expert at nutrition and diet, and specifically as it pertains to energy. Christina is a certified functional registered dietitian. She's also a licensed and certified nutritionist and dietitian in the state of Washington, as well as in other locations as well. And Christina, we are so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome. So before we dive into the topic, I actually like to learn a little bit more about you. Most of our audience will understand on a general level what a dietitian and nutritionist does, but for you, you're specifically an integrative and functional dietitian. What is that, and what inspired you to become one?
Yeah, so the biggest difference between an integrative and functional dietitian and a conventional dietitian is that integrative and functional really takes a much deeper dive into kind of hyper personalizing recommendations for someone. So, for example, instead of just talking about general recommendations for nutrition or exercise, given whatever someone's health conditions are, health concerns are, we're really talking about looking at all these other factors like genetics in some cases, digestive health, to tailor those nutrition recommendations. But then also looking at things like toxin exposure, digestive health, sleep, stress, all these other factors can really, really influence our health. So that's kind of what we would focus on in the integrative and functional world. as a conventional dietitian, you may just focus on diet and exercise, and they may be a little less personalized. But really, what got me into this field was it really started before college, but I was just feeling absolutely terrible, really, really low energy. I was Googling all the time, trying to figure out what my symptoms were.
Right.
A lot of digestive issues, hormones, mood. And I felt like I was really young to be having all these symptoms. And, I was
Sure.
put on some medications and they kind of helped, didn't really get me too far. But then at one point in college, one of my family members was actually admitted to a rehab facility for an addiction, and it was
Wow.
a really scary experience, and it was a big deal for my whole family. But I remember when I was visiting them, I ended up meeting the staff nutritionist, and I was kind of interested in the field at that time, but didn't really quite know what I wanted to do yet. And he sat me down and he said, you should really look into the field of functional medicine nutrition. It's really trying to address the underlying causes of what's going on with someone versus kind of using more of a symptom management approach. And
Hmm.
so at that point, it started to click for me, like, oh, maybe these medications weren't really the long-term answer for my symptoms, especially because I wasn't feeling good still. And so it kind of set me on this path to study functional nutrition. And so I went and became a registered dietitian, which is a national credential, and then got
Hmm.
additional training as a functional nutritionist and dietitian. And through that process, I was really fortunate to learn more about functional medicine and nutrition on myself to really
Right.
get myself feeling better, and to kind of heal my symptoms and get all those figured out. And so I later went to open up my practice just because I was working in a hospital for a while. I was working in a clinic for a little while, but I didn't quite feel like I was able to help people in the way that I wanted to
Hmm.
with functional nutrition. And so, yeah, now I'm a virtual practitioner and I see clients throughout the US. And I really work on just getting people feeling better and understanding what their bodies need, so we can just get it back into balance.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's so important. You're basically taking a much more holistic view of nutrition. And with that, just a follow-up question. I was going to ask you about your approach to diet nutrition, but you see to that effect, you see so many diets out there. A million of them: paleo and keto and Atkins and this and that and intermittent fasting. There's a million of them, right? But I would assume, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I would assume then that you can't really paint everyone with the same brush, right? So I would assume that your answer to that is it's not going to work for everyone. So you can't just assume that, oh, this sounds good, I'm going to do it. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. And that's kind of, the beauty and the curse of this field and human beings, right? It's like if only everyone could just follow this one diet and it would be so
Right.
clear for everyone
Right.
to thrive. But it's just simply not like that because humans are a little different. And so we do need to tailor someone's diet to whatever's going on with that person. So, keto diet might be great for one person in the short term. For another person, it might be not a good idea whatsoever. So it is important to kind of get some support when you're kind of trying to figure out what might be best for you.
Got it. So in our topic today about energy, I'm just going to ask you the first basic question. Is there a relationship between your diet and your energy level? Again, we're not talking about your diet, meaning I had an extra Diet Coke and I feel pumped for my meeting. I mean, on a general level, does what you eat on a daily basis affect your energy level across time?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, kind of at a really foundational level, every cell in our body needs energy, and that energy can come from glucose, it can come from ketones, but ultimately we need calories. However, the quality of those calories matter.
Mhm.
So, I'm sure everyone listening, you've looked at a label and you've seen the calories in there. That's essentially the energy that you're going to get from that. However, again, the calories do matter. So, if you're getting a cup of broccoli versus a cup of Cheerios or something, you're not going to get the same level of nutrients. And the nutrients can also play a really important role in your energy levels. There's also some other things to consider that are often overlooked. One of those things is blood sugar.
Mhm.
So I'm sure some of you have felt, that spike in blood sugar, that kind of sugar high after you eat a dessert of some kind, and then you might
Sure.
feel that crash shortly
Big time.
after, right? So blood sugar is really important for energy, and we want to make sure our blood sugar is nice and stable throughout the day versus doing these major fluctuations, like major spikes and then major drops. So that's
Mhm.
an important factor. And we'll talk more about kind of how to maintain that further along.
Yeah.
Another important factor is our digestive health. So, if our digestion is out of balance, not only can we be less efficient with absorbing those calories and those nutrients, but if you have certain levels of bad bacteria, certain foods can actually contribute to fatigue after meals as well. So, that's another one to consider.
Is
And
that,
then, Mhm.
sorry to interrupt, is that kind of to do with the microbiome and kind of
Yes.
what's going on there? And so certain foods are triggering that.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah,
Interesting.
that community of bacteria and largely your large intestine and your colon is really what we're referring to there. Yeah.
Very
Um,
interesting.
and then lastly, food intolerances or sensitivities. So if you're eating foods that your body is reacting to in some way, that can influence your brain chemistry in some cases, and
Mhm.
it can kind of trigger inflammation as well. So that all needs to be tailored to the person.
Got it. So that kind of helps. And so you brought up a really important point at the very beginning. You said calories. Calories are energy. We always think about calories not as energy, but as the enemy. Right? Because
Mhm.
that's going to lead to weight gain, and we got to limit our calories. But truth be told, if you're not consuming any calories, you're probably not going to have any energy.
Mhm.
That being said, as you said, not all calories are created equal. So
Mhm.
we talk about proteins, fats, carbohydrates, right? Do those different, and I'm certainly not the expert, but I know about those three categories, right? So of those three categories, do some impact energy more than others in the short term versus the long term? Should we think about that breakdown in calories when we're thinking about energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm totally going to sound like a broken record by the end of this, so I apologize in advance, but this is something that
Reinforcement.
truly needs to be tailored. So, but yes, the breakdown definitely matters. And ultimately, we want things to be balanced. So, we don't want you just eating a bunch of carbohydrates or just eating a bunch of protein or fat. We do need all of these essential building blocks for a lot of different functions in the body. But kind of
Mhm.
at a basic level, carbohydrates are the easiest way to access glucose, which every cell in our body needs. We can derive glucose from protein and fat. It's just kind of a longer path to get there. So for
Sure.
some people, doing very low carb, if they're not quite efficient in making those conversions, essentially, might feel terrible. Someone
Mhm.
might feel awful doing that. But yeah, in general, so carbohydrates break it down into glucose. So those can kind of provide energy. However, we want to make sure they're in balance with protein and fat. So,
Mhm.
some examples of some healthy carbohydrates are things like fruit, especially the lower sugar fruits like berries, things like potatoes, winter squash, turnips, rutabaga, like the starchy type vegetables, whole grains. And then the unhealthy carbohydrates would be things like sugar, sweets, candy, ice cream, cookies, things like
Mhm.
that. And so, kind of back to pairing those carbs with other things to make sure we are supporting energy production. Pairing carbohydrate with protein and healthy fat is a really good way to kind of sustain energy.
Got it. And so a couple of questions with that. So I'm going to ask a
Mhm.
really stupid question here, right? So carbohydrates are carbohydrates, right? So you get carbohydrates in berries, you get carbohydrates in candy, right? And
Mhm.
they both turn into glucose in your bloodstream, and that's the what gives you that energy. Why is
Mhm.
one good and one bad?
Yeah, so it really comes down to a couple things. So one of those things is fiber,
Mhm.
and another thing is nutrients.
Okay.
So you're not getting hardly any. nutrients or fiber in a candy bar, you're just getting sugar. That's probably why you're, having that crash. Or it's likely why you're having that sugar spike and then blood sugar crash.
Hmm.
With something like some berries, you're getting fiber and then you're getting a ton of nutrients that can really support energy production as well. So those are kind of the big differences there.
So is it safe to say those nutrients are going to support? So you're going to get the initial sugar you get from either one. It's going to give you that spike in energy, for instance. But it's
Mhm.
those other balanced nutrients that kind of maintain it at a good level, rather than just kind of seeing this peak and trough situation where all you're getting is, I guess the term, the empty calories. You're just getting the calories, a sugar high, and then that's it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it can also, so as far as the fiber goes, it can actually delay your absorption of that glucose into your system, because fiber kind of delays that whole digestion process in a good way.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's another factor too.
And those foods that you mentioned, those good carbs, like you said, berries and the squash and whatnot, those are that combination of the fiber and the good carbs. Are those good examples of those?
Yes, exactly. All those are packed with nutrients, packed with fiber, and those complex carbohydrates.
Got it.
Mhm.
Um, with regards to fat and protein, though, I mean, obviously, if you're seeing something around lunch, right? Would you expect the fat and the protein to give you any type of energy boost in the short term too, or that's kind of more for later?
Absolutely. I mean, they can, and again, this all needs to be tailored a little bit. So, for some people, if you have a blood sugar imbalance, having a little bit of carbohydrate at your meal can be helpful to kind of maintain that blood sugar and your energy. But
Mhm.
other people do really well just having some protein and healthy fat. So, they still play a role in energy. It's just not as efficient of a conversion to kind of access that glucose. The carbohydrate, you get it pretty much immediately. The protein and fat just takes a little bit longer. But that's also why it's really important to always make sure you pair whenever you have a carbohydrate with a protein and fat. So, for example, if you had a salad with a piece of chicken and then, some potatoes or something,
Mhm.
in general, having half your plate with some veggies that don't really contain a whole lot of carbohydrates, like some lettuce or something, and then having around quarter of your plate carbs, quarter of your plate protein. That's just one model for how that balance could look like.
Mhm.
Um, mhm.
And just so I understand completely, in that model, the carbs that I had as part of my meal is going to give me that initial energy level. And then the protein and the fat will kick in later on so that it's kind of a more stable level
Sustained.
across the day or
Yep,
across whatever period of time. Versus if I
exactly.
just had the carbs as part of my lunch, let's say, I would get that initial boost, but I'd probably be hungry and tired in a couple of hours, basically.
Exactly. Yep.
Got it.
Mhm.
You had mentioned a few already, but the internet is packed full of clickbait articles where these 5 foods will boost your energy today. It's like always, it's like on a daily basis. But if you had to choose, I guess, and again, I'm going to preface it for you. It obviously depends on the person, right? But if you had to choose on a general level, 5 of the healthiest, high energy, most reliable foods, what would you choose as a nutritionist?
Yeah, so I start thinking about what are the foods that are most packed with the nutrients that are key for energy production.
Mhm.
And so when we're thinking about that, I mean, I usually think about B vitamins. Those are extremely important. Iron, magnesium, vitamin C, coenzyme Q10, zinc. And by the way, anyone listening, I wouldn't go out and go buy all these supplements because that needs to be tailored. But kind of focusing on those nutrients that are really crucial for energy production, I think about some protein sources like grass-fed beef, organic chicken and turkey, really high in B vitamins. If anyone's brave and can find good quality organ meats, those are really high in nutrients. Leafy greens like kale and spinach, legumes, fatty fish like salmon and tuna, wild caught if possible, shellfish, nuts and seeds, bell peppers, strawberries, some whole grains. So those are all packed with all those nutrients that I listed. So those are really high in those energy producing nutrients.
Got it. So for those energy foods, it's not the same you're hearing about just calories and sugar. It's about everything else. Because as we said, and not to belabor the point, you can get that glucose from basically anything,
Right.
right? But it's that healthy combination and the nutrients that can support that would really do that are really the secret sauce there in terms of your top 5 or top 10 list, right?
Yep.
Not just like which one's the highest in sugar. Let me pick that one and that'll give me the biggest boost. Um,
Exactly.
on the flip side, I've heard of low energy foods, right? Foods that may not only low energy, that may decrease your energy after you eat it. A classic
Hmm.
example, the only example that I ever learned of in medical school was about turkey and tryptophan. So,
Hmm.
you get that tryptophan after lunch and it makes you tired. Are there other foods aside from that one that, every medical student hears of? That's the only thing we know about nutrition. But nonetheless, are there others that can really deplete you of energy that you may want to stay away from?
Hmm. Yeah. So processed carbs, so things like white bread, baked goods, cookies, crackers, candies, things like that. Again, you might have a really short increase in energy, but it's not going to be for very long. So those
For
are
sure.
pretty much guaranteed to kind of cause a crash, and for the most part. So that can definitely decrease your energy as your blood sugar crashes from those.
Mhm.
Also, excessive fat intake as well. So
Okay.
if you're eating, and I know we might talk about this later on, but if you're eating a very large meal with a ton of fat, that can really be very laborious for your digestive tract to kind of break all that down. And
Mhm.
because fat digests a lot slower than um, carbohydrates, for example, you're not going to be able to access those nutrients very quickly. So, and
Mhm.
when I say excessive fat, I mean, eating out at a fast food restaurant or restaurant food or something like that. That can likely kind of drop your energy, and also coming back to your digestive tract. If you have that imbalance of bacteria, that especially can contribute to fatigue and brain fog and some inflammation in some cases.
So I'm going to definitely get out of my comfort zone here and my knowledge zone. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question. It may be too much in the weeds, but
Mhm.
my understanding is some diets, I think keto is one of them. I could be wrong, so please
Mhm.
correct me if I am. Really focus a lot on fat and protein and away from those complex carbs. Do you know that if people are on those diets, do they tend to have that weight down, not weight, but that fog or that decrease in energy throughout the day? What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely have seen clients that try and do keto, and their digestive tract is not ready for it.
Hmm.
And so it's definitely, and they don't feel good. They end up having low energy, and like just really terrible. That's an example of someone that may not be ready for keto, and their bodies just may not be kind of attuned to that type of diet. I
Hmm.
think keto definitely can be done in a healthy way for someone who is being really diligent about the types of fats they're choosing as well. I think there's a healthy way to do keto and an unhealthy way. And then it comes down to portions as well. So if
Hmm.
you're having, an extremely large plate and you're getting uncomfortably full after every meal, that may be excessive. If someone's eating some healthy fats and they're getting to a place of feeling 80% full, they may feel amazing. There's a lot of people that feel great doing fat and protein.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So does that fully answer your question?
Totally, because I have
Yeah.
friends that have tried keto short term, and they're like, "What could go wrong?" Right? It's all my
Mhm.
favorite stuff. I don't even like the other stuff, right? And then
Right.
they find out that it all goes back down to the common denominator, which you've been saying. It really depends on the person, and I think
Mhm.
in this case, this is where it's time for a public service announcement that, like, when you go, especially when you go on. I'm not going to say extreme diets, but extreme, like less balanced diets.
Mhm.
I would say you definitely really need to consult with a nutritionist, a dietitian, a doctor, some practitioner
Mhm.
that can really steer you in the right direction. Because this is where I think things can go off the rails pretty quickly,
Mhm.
particularly for people with underlying medical conditions. Is that correct? Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. So you actually did a great segue there in terms of portion size, right? So it's not only about what you eat, but how much of it you eat. To what extent does the size of the meal impact your energy level shortly or long term thereafter? And what is that optimal size to the extent that you
Mhm.
can generalize it?
Right, right. I think a good rule of thumb that I often tell my clients is if you can get to the place where you're about 80% full,
Hmm.
and stop eating when you're 80% full, that's generally a good rule of thumb. So you're not overeating and your stomach is bloated and you just kind of feel sluggish. Again, that can be kind of a sign that you may have eaten too much.
Sure.
Um, you do want to, get enough calories to carry you out throughout the day, so you're providing your cells with that energy. So you don't want it to be too small, but you also don't want it to be too large. So 80% full is kind of a good rule of thumb, because if we think about, I know some people that will not eat until 4 p.m. and they'll basically just drink coffee all day. And at that point, you can kind of assume, like, if we're thinking of our bodies like a machine or an engine, right? Like, we're kind of running on fumes by that point.
Right.
We're not really getting that adequate fuel, and our bodies are kind of having to go into our other stores to access that. So
Right.
yeah, so 80% full is a good rule of thumb there.
And so that actually leads to the segues into the next question in terms of aside from the size of the meal, also the timing of the meals or the number of meals. So, and again, this is not a conversation about weight loss; it's about energy, right? So, from the standpoint of maintaining energy, I've heard everything, right? I've heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but don't eat breakfast because it's not good. You should wait till lunch. And I heard, you should have multiple snacks throughout the day to keep an even keel. And I heard no snacking is horrible for you. So kind of where do you stand on that? Again, I know it's a balance, right?
Mhm.
Between maintaining your weight and maintaining energy, et cetera. Where do you stand in terms of timing of meals?
Yeah, so this comes back to the blood sugar question for me. So, and I often experiment with this with my clients if they are having low energy throughout the day. Um, we'll experiment, and then this also depends on digestion.
Mhm.
So, in general, like, I don't, again, it's not a one size fits all thing. I don't think everyone should fast. I don't think everyone should eat every 2, 3 hours, but it really depends on where their body's at there. So, for example, if someone is waiting 5 to 6 hours between meals, which in general, I think if you can do that, and if you're eating enough at a meal and you have that energy, that's considered a little fast, right? And
Okay.
that is helpful and important for your digestion to kind of do its thing and clean
Mhm.
out everything, food and bacteria to kind of fully move through. But some people may drop in their blood sugar between those two meals.
Right.
So for some people that are feeling kind of low energy within 2 to 3 hours, that might be a sign that either you didn't get enough nutrition at your earlier meal, or your blood sugar is just starting to drop. And that's a whole nother thing we want to look into if you are dropping.
Mhm.
But something to experiment with. So if you are feeling that low energy 2, 3 hours later, having a healthy snack, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, with some healthy carbohydrates, healthy protein and fat. See if that does help your energy, and then there we go. That's a sign your blood sugar just needed to come back into that steady state and up to where we want it to be.
And that's great. So taking that example, so you ate breakfast and before lunch you're feeling not only hungry, but you're feeling kind of tired, right? You're
Mhm.
feeling kind of like you're going on fumes. Obviously, snacking, which we'll get to in a minute, is an option. But does that also mean, to your point, which was an important one in my mind, that your breakfast probably wasn't ideally balanced? Maybe it was high on the carbohydrates that gave you the rush, but maybe not enough of the other elements, the protein, the fat, the other things that will keep you across. Is that a fair
Mhm.
assumption?
Absolutely. And again, some people can eat totally balanced and then still need a little support. And again, that's a whole nother thing we would want to investigate.
Hmm.
But absolutely, it's so common, and I see it all the time, where breakfast consists of cereal and some fruit, or
Right.
yeah, like oatmeal and fruit or something. And it's not enough to sustain you to that next meal. So we definitely want to focus on balanced meals first, see how you feel trying to wait those 4 or 5 hours to the next meal.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then kind of adjust accordingly.
And again, just as a poor man's nutritionist, if you are adjusting, would you be based on that example? Like I just had cereal, right,
Mhm.
or oatmeal, and I feel like for an hour or two I'm good, but now it's only 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and I need that. What can I do at breakfast to carry me through to lunch to the extent I can. For some people, to your point, you can't. But
Hmm.
would you add more protein and fat? Would you add like some? I don't even. I'm going to ask you. I don't know why I'm coming up
Yeah.
with questions with ways to put in. What else would you tell somebody to possibly add to breakfast to give them that longer term energy level?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, no, you got it. So, kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier, always trying to pair whenever you have any kind of carbohydrate, you want that protein and fat to kind of sustain you. So, for
Yeah.
example, you know, if we still wanted to use up the cereal, I'm very pro whole unprocessed foods. If you can imagine it growing in nature, that's a good way to go. But if we wanted to kind of finish off that cereal, maybe add a couple eggs on the side, maybe throw some nuts into that cereal with some berries. So adding that fiber, fat, and protein.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, get into a place where maybe you do a scramble in the morning or make some of your own sausage and have some fruit or veggies on the side or something like that. That would be kind of ideal. But those are
Mm-hmm.
some examples of how you can kind of round that out.
Got it. Got it. And in terms of, before we go on to snacking, in terms of the three meals of the day, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, I have heard different emphasis on different meals. From an energy standpoint, is there a most important meal of the day?
I wouldn't say I put the most importance between breakfast and lunch, but I do think that getting most of your nutrition in between, the morning and afternoon versus all of your nutrients at night just
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot more sense. And I'll tell
Mm-hmm.
you why. So, first of all, I mean, kind of going off of what we've been talking about, our cells do need calories and energy, right? So, if we're not eating until very late in the day, our cells are going to be not as efficient with getting that energy, right? Because we're likely going to have to go and access into our bodies and into our stores to get that
Mm-hmm.
nutrition. So I recommend, again, we tailor this, but breakfast and lunch, getting most of your calories at that point, and dinner, not having all of your calories and having it be kind of a moderate portion.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason for that, outside of just being able to get that energy during the day when your body needs it, we're up and moving and working and doing what we need to do during the day, we need fuel for that. Food is
Right.
fuel. But in the evening, we also, during sleep, a huge part of sleep is detoxification. So if we're eating a massive meal at dinner time, it's going to take our body and our liver to process all those nutrients. And
Ah.
if we're not allowing at least, and again, this needs to be personalized, but 12 to 13 hours at nighttime takes around 6 to 8 hours for our liver to kind of process all those nutrients. We need those remaining hours for our liver to clean house and go and detoxify. And if we're not allowing that time, we could run the risk of our livers not being as efficient with detoxification. If those toxins can build up, that can absolutely impact our energy levels too.
Well, that makes so much sense because that's what I didn't quite understand. And not to say that I'm unknowing in this, but like, for instance, with intermittent fasting, right? I can understand when people do two meals a day, but when they go down to just dinner, what always struck me as strange was that like you're packing in those calories and that energy at the time where most people will least need it, right? Because they're going to eat and then maybe watch TV and go to bed, and it's just
Right.
kind of then you don't need that to sleep, you know what I mean? And so
Hmm.
it kind of seemed counterintuitive to me. So
Hmm.
I'm glad I'm not crazy when it comes to that. So that does make a lot of sense. Now, moving on to the bane of everyone's existence, snacking, right? Because at least from the standpoint of maintaining weight, right? Where that pantry always looks so attractive when you're walking past the kitchen. So a few questions about snacking. First is, best snack foods. I think you started to mention that. If you are going to snack, what should you snack on?
Yeah, so coming back to that formula of, okay, where's like a little bit of healthy carbohydrate and fiber, where's a little bit of healthy protein and fat. So some examples could be a hard-boiled egg with some berries, or a close handful of nuts with like a few slices of apple or a few slices of some other piece of fruit. Or you could just do like a few bites of leftovers, like maybe, some leftover chicken or a few potatoes,
Hmm.
some carrot sticks, or some bell pepper, some veggies with maybe some guacamole or some hummus. So in
Hmm.
each of those snack ideas, there's a little bit of that carb, again, not just the carb, and then a little bit of protein and a little bit of healthy fat.
Got it. Well, that's really important. So you're not looking for a snack just to kind of get you another hour by loading up on carbs. It follows the same model of your bigger meals, just on a smaller scale, basically.
Yeah,
And I-
exactly.
I've also heard, like, in snacks, fiber being a big thing about for
Mhm.
snacking as well. How does that
Yes.
play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. So fiber would come with those complex carbohydrates. So for
Hmm.
example, like the berries, the apple, fiber is also in nuts, or the potatoes, or the guacamole and hummus. So basically, any kind of complex carbohydrate is going to have some fiber in it. So because fiber is digested a bit slower, it can kind of carry you a little bit farther as well.
Got it, with whatever you're taking in.
Mhm.
And this is obviously going to vary from person to person. Is there an optimal snack size?
Yeah, it kind of, I mean, it depends if you're trying to make it a meal or not, like and how long you're planning on waiting till your next meal.
Hmm.
But in general, I often it's yeah, for some reason my guys often overdo the nuts. So we usually talk about nut
Excellent.
portioning. Yeah, because they're
Yeah.
easy to eat, right? They're delicious, but they
Yeah.
have good calories. So a good rule of thumb is a closed handful. So take your
Hmm.
nuts, close your hand, put it in a bowl,
Right.
take a handful of something else, whether it be, and obviously don't grab some potatoes or whatever, but a good handful is like, yeah, so maybe some berries or some fruit or something. A handful is kind of a good rule of thumb.
Well, that's actually a great rule of thumb, because that's I mean, not that this is my own session of treatment, right? But like, the problem I feel with snacks is, unlike a meal is set on your plate, unless you go to a buffet, which is everyone's worst nightmare. But if you have it on the plate, that is your meal. With a snack, you're walking by the pantry. Yeah, you take one handful, but I'm still snacking. So there's another handful of something else, right? So I think that's a good idea. One handful of whatever you're going to eat probably is a good snack.
Hmm.
Now, I've also heard a lot about, people subscribe to, you have to have 4 snacks a day or 6 snacks a day, or is there a number, or is it just basically, if you're hungry, you're just tiding over?
No, no, I definitely don't recommend just automatically incorporating snacks because again, if you can get by and have your full meal and wait till the next meal, you're giving your body a chance to work through all of those nutrients, allow your digestion to kind of move food and bacteria through. So it is good to kind of wait. Again, unless I've worked with patients that have undergone bariatric surgery in the past. So, like in those cases, if your anatomy is very different, of course we're gonna modify that. So for those kinds of people, we would want very very small frequent meals throughout the day. But for the most part, it's not automatic that you should have a snack.
Got it. Got it. No, that's
Mhm.
really, really helpful. Um, Moving away from pure diet, I want to focus a little bit on what most of us try to shortcut with, right? Which
Mhm.
is not the balanced meal of the handful, that's for sure. When it comes to energy, so I want to hear, and I want to hear kind of, I don't know if they're the same or different. The 4 things, or the 3 things that we hear about, are like sodas and coffee. We hear about energy drinks. We hear about power bars, right? That people, those are like the, truthfully, people's go-to snacks, right? I'm just going to go to
Mhm.
Starbucks or Dunkin' and get a coffee, and that's my snack, right? Or I'm going to go to the supermarket. It's so convenient. I'm just going to put it in my bag or my purse. I'll have that, or an energy drink. What is your take on that in terms of energy?
Yeah, I mean, if we're using the example of waking up and then kind of pounding energy drinks or coffee until dinner time, you're really just again running on fumes, and it can be really stressful on the body.
Mhm.
Not to mention, a lot of the ingredients in the energy drinks are not great for our bodies. Just the sweeteners to look out for are things like aspartame, sucralose. You want to stay away from those as much as possible.
Mhm.
They can feed a lot of those bad bacteria in our digestive tract. They can even interfere with our metabolism and kind of our blood sugar as well. So it's good to avoid those drinks for that reason. And then also, drinking excess caffeine can just be really stressful in the body as well.
Mhm.
So that's as far as the energy drinks. It's best to avoid those if possible. But if you do need a caffeine boost, ultimately we want to figure out why that is, right? So
Mhm.
did you not eat enough today? are you low in certain vitamins and minerals? Is this related to hormones? Is it related to other things that are going on in your body? But then as far as, getting, if you do need a little bit of a caffeine boost, absolutely, like if you absolutely need it, going with something natural. So maybe going with a cup of coffee, not with all the sugar and sweeteners and things like that in there, or
Right.
going with some black tea or something. At least with those, we're getting some good antioxidants and some other nutrients. So there can be some benefit to using those.
No, that's great from the caffeine standpoint. I mean, they can't replace good nutrition. And the true shortcut, though, I think it was, what about all those bars, right? So that at
Oh yeah.
least the marketing behind them is everything Christina just said, we're going to pack into a package. You don't even have to worry about the handful. We'll even package it for you in a nice wrapper, and you can have that. And imagine you're perfectly balanced and you have that snack that you need or that meal that you need. I mean, some people, that's their meal, not only a
Hmm.
snack.
Right, right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in general, I'm very, again, pro whole foods. So unprocessed foods as much as possible. So, if you must have a power bar, I would absolutely look at the ingredients, or like a protein bar rather, not the power bar specifically, but I would
Mhm.
look at the ingredients and then see if you can actually identify what those ingredients are, and if the ingredients that they use is something that you can imagine living or growing in nature. Okay, so that's kind of a good rule of thumb. Again, can I imagine this power bar in nature? No.
Probably not.
Yeah, yeah, but there are some out there, that aren't the worst. They are using more real ingredients. So, but again, if you can do a whole food, do some nuts, do a little fruit, have a hard boiled egg, like that stuff. And even there's some healthy jerky bars out there now that are unprocessed, and they get from the meat from a good quality source. Doing kind of whole food snacks like that would be a better option.
Right. So just so I'm clear, it's not so much that those bars are not giving you the protein or the fat or the carbohydrate. It's just the packaging that, I don't mean the packaging of the bar. I mean the bar itself that it's coming in, because all the processed stuff, all the other elements in there are actually potentially doing damage to your intestines, which it's kind of like a domino effect, right? Which will
Hmm.
then affects potentially the bacteria there, affects the movement of food through there, affects how you absorb glucose. And it's not like it would potentially affect it that moment, but over time, if that's what you're getting your body acclimated to, it kind of causes that shift of how that whole digestion process occurs. Am I correct with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's not a sustainable source of nutrition, because those bars are also lacking in a lot of the nutrients. So not only, so it may have the protein and maybe some carbohydrate, but
Mhm.
the nutrients like the B vitamins, the zinc, the vitamin C, CoQ10, all of those things, in general, you're not getting a whole lot of those from those kinds of bars. And those are really, if you have high levels of those nutrients, that's what translates into sustainable energy.
Got it. Got it.
Hmm.
And that actually, and I know you kind of alluded to a little bit before that takes me to vitamins and supplements to boost
Hmm.
energy. Like again, the B vitamins and stuff. The supermarkets are chock full of it. Whole Foods, I mean, they make a living off of this. What is, I think you kind of mentioned it before, but what is your official take on supplements for the purpose of energy or otherwise?
Hmm. Yeah, and so supplements I definitely use in my practice. They're incredibly helpful and effective for people that are exhausted and need that support. But the biggest difference is between, something you could go and buy in a drugstore without any guidance, between being guided by a practitioner, is if you went to a drugstore and just started trying things out. Until I'm guilty of this myself, because I had crazy terrible fatigue for a long time. So no shame to anyone that is doing that, because you just need energy and you are trying everything.
Right.
But if you go into a store and you're just trying things out, you could potentially do more harm than good, because you don't really know what your body needs. And there's a lot of intricacies as far as nutrients go and supplementation goes, as far as, yeah, how your metabolism is functioning, specifically what form of the nutrients your body needs. That's a big one. Also, the quality of the products you're getting. A lot of the things that you can get in a drugstore, a lot of supplements that you can just get in a drugstore are unregulated. And a lot of those companies don't do a whole lot of quality control testing because it's
Right.
usually expensive to do that. And so that's why those products are typically cheaper.
Right.
So there's a lot of issues with kind of just going out on your own and trying a bunch of different things. But they can be extremely effective if it's done properly. So if
Mhm.
someone's guiding you, and even if if you're able to do specialty testing, like I can think of a client recently came with a lot of fatigue, brain fog, a lot of digestive issues. So he was not absorbing his nutrition effectively. We
Mhm.
ended up doing some specialty testing, which just showed us his levels of vitamins and minerals in his body. And once we were able to get that information, we were able to kind of come up with a tailored plan to figure out what his body needed to give him more energy. And so, and
Mhm.
ultimately that really helped his energy levels. So if it's done in a proper way, they can be really effective. Absolutely.
And is your take, so if you have a client come in and you're suspecting they have a deficit in a particular vitamin or mineral, is your first instinct to try to increase foods that are rich in that and see if you can bridge the gap, or are supplements like reliable enough to go as a first, step, if you will, in that situation?
Yeah. So with the client that I was thinking of, it depends on how well their digestion is working,
Hmm.
honestly. Because if there's a lot going on and they have a lot of symptoms like gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, things like that, those are all signs that someone is not efficiently absorbing nutrients.
Right.
So I always encourage food first whenever possible. So if someone doesn't have any kind of digestive issues, we focus on, okay, let's get those foods in as much as we can. But for some people, they just do need a little bit more support. For example, with someone with a digestive imbalance, they may do a lot better with a nutrient that's dissolvable under their tongue versus
Right.
something that they have to, a pill that they need to swallow,
Sure.
because you may not be absorbing as much from that medium or that route.
Great point. Great point. I'm a big fan of that as well. I found that in my practice, for a lot of things not related to energy, but for related to other issues where studies, let's say, have found that dietary consumption of X, Y, or Z has shown a benefit. When it gets to pure supplements, something is lost in translation. I think a lot of that comes to do with what you were talking about. It really depends on who's creating them, how much of that supplement is of that nutrient is actually in the supplement, how much can it be trusted. I think there's so much to that that I've seen
Exactly.
personally. So I definitely mirror and echo what you're saying for sure. Now,
Absolutely.
something that we partake in periodically is alcohol. That I understand does have a pretty significant impact on energy levels. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So all the B vitamins I kept mentioning throughout this podcast are so important for energy production and detoxification in our immune systems. And
Mhm.
alcohol depletes these essential B vitamins. So,
Interesting.
I'm not saying to totally. Not drink alcohol whatsoever. But if you're having serious issues with your energy, and you are drinking regularly, that
Mhm.
could be contributing to fatigue because you're really just depleting a lot of nutrients when you drink. Um, and some people are more efficient with detoxifying than others.
Mhm.
If you have some digestive concerns and then maybe you're not getting a balanced diet and then maybe you're drinking, I mean, that can kind of be a perfect storm as far as depleting those B vitamins and other nutrients.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Mhm.
But aside from drinking alcohol, what about just drinking water? A lot of diets really push for a lot of fluid intake. Does that help? I've heard some places that helps with energy levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can kind of think of our bodies or our kind of our bloodstream like
Hmm.
a river, for example, right? And our bodies are mostly made of water. So if we have this river, that's how we're transporting nutrients and transporting different materials to the rest of our body. And if that river is dried up or barely has any water, it's going to be really inefficient to get the nutrients where they need to go and get all of the compounds we need into
Hmm.
our cells as well. So yeah, if you're dehydrated, that can make that whole process really inefficient and can absolutely contribute to fatigue. So in general, for the most part, unless you have a heart condition or you have some fluid retention issues, aiming for around half your weight in ounces is a good goal. And of course, if you're not getting anywhere near that, don't just start drinking that right away.
Hmm.
Start there, working up there slowly. Yeah.
So this just, I want to repeat that again. So half your weight in pounds, I'm assuming, is
Hmm.
the number of ounces that you should be drinking a day,
Yes.
as a rough estimate. Of course, not taking into effect other health conditions that you should run by your doctor. But for
Yeah.
the average healthy person walking through the door, that's the half of your weight in pounds, but in ounces of water. That's
Yes,
a great
exactly.
rule of thumb.
And that's minimum. So if you're not sweating or exercising, so if you're sweating or exercising, you'd want to do a little bit more.
Got it. Got it. And then how does we started the podcast talking about how as an integrative and functional dietitian, you really look at the big picture and you look at kind of a holistic approach to nutrition, energy. How does exercise fit into this picture? I mean, on a logical level, you think exercise should deplete your energy, right? But I've heard also that exercise really works hand in glove with nutrition in terms of boosting energy. How does that work? Or first of all, do you agree with that? And if so, how does that work?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with it. And it can work from a few different mechanisms. One thing that most people have heard about is that endorphin release when you do exercise. So it can really impact your brain chemistry positively by exercising.
Hmm.
However, of course, if someone is waking up exhausted throughout the whole day, I'm not going to have them go lift 200-pound weights or something like that. So we do need to tailor it to the person, like even just doing a gentle walk or some stretching that can really help improve circulation and can kind of make that transport of those nutrients a bit more efficient as well. And that can support energy production. Also, I mean, for men specifically, doing some resistance training can help increase testosterone. Again,
Hmm.
not overdoing it, but that can really support energy production as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed. It has to be a team effort there from all sides there.
Hmm.
Now, one of the we talked about some of the fad diets earlier. The big ones: paleo, keto, intermittent, etc. For your clients, and we're going to take this again. Full disclaimer and disclosure: it's all personalized, etc. But
Hmm.
for your clients that are truly low energy, are any of those diets particularly ones to avoid? I'm not saying that we should recommend one, but are there any to avoid that you might worry? You know what? They're already low energy. Without the proper guidance, if they're doing this themselves, it may push them into even lower energy than they already are.
Yeah, the biggest one comes to mind that I see a ton is intermittent fasting. If
Hmm.
you're super low energy, we need to figure out why ultimately. And intermittent fasting can sometimes worsen that because,
Hmm.
again, it can be connected to hormones and how efficiently things like your thyroid, your adrenals, your digestive tract, how all of that is working together. So, the
Hmm.
intermittent fasting, I generally don't recommend unless someone's just eating a bunch of carbohydrates or something and has a lot of blood sugar concerns. We might experiment with that, but that in general, I don't really recommend for people that are really tired. I think the most balanced approach out of all of those is paleo. And I
Hmm.
know a lot of people kind of make paleo very low carb. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but that at least, you're eating whole foods. You can
Right.
eat carbohydrates. You eat plenty of vegetables. You don't need to overdo the protein.
Hmm.
Keto, you know, if someone can process fat efficiently and we do it in a healthy way without completely eliminating carbs, that can be helpful for energy with some people,
Hmm.
for kind of blood sugar reasons especially. But yeah, absolutely, needs to be tailored. And someone might do amazing on one diet, someone might do terribly on the same diet.
For sure, for
So yeah.
sure. And to that extent, not most people aren't gonna, unfortunately, go and to a practitioner for help, right? They're gonna try this and that on their own. Are there red flags that they should look out for in the process of trying a new diet? Again, if they're doing it for energy or otherwise, what are those red flags that you tell your clients? Say, hey, you know what? If you're noticing this, it's time to let me know, let your doctor know this is not normal as part of a diet.
hmm Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is just debilitating fatigue. So
Hmm.
if they are, I mean, cannot do anything during the day, if they're bedridden, something like that, I mean, that's definitely a sign. Okay, this is not the right thing to do. Also, I mean, I work with a lot of people with different kinds of digestive issues. So things like, I wouldn't expect most of the time for a diet to cause this unless there's some underlying thing going on. But for really dark stools, I mean, blood in the stool, of course, something like that. If
Hmm.
you're anemic, that can absolutely cause low energy levels. So that would be something to
Sure.
investigate for sure. And it, is one of those questions where if I see it, then I would send someone to a doctor, but I don't have a complete list. So
Right, not
that's
like a
some,
punch list or anything. Yeah, no,
yeah.
those are good ones. Certainly good ones to keep in mind. It's
Mhm.
not just like just get over it kind of thing. Power through. Those are things that you should not power through.
Right, right.
Now, more from in terms of your own practice. Again, specifically as integrative and functional dietitian. If I'm walking through the door and I say, Christina, I'm coming here not for weight loss, but I'm just low energy and I don't want to do this by myself. What would be your approach in like sifting through my issues and kind of getting me on the right path on a high level?
Mhm. So yeah, on a high level, without going into the nitty-gritty details, I would walk through my 7-step gut restoration protocol. And essentially what that would look like is we would first look into your history. So we would do a really deep dive to kind of understand what some contributing factors might be. And
Mhm.
together we can kind of connect the dots there. Because
Right.
a lot of things that can happen over a person's life can deplete nutrients, can mess with the gut microbiome, and a host of other things, can mess with brain chemistry, all of that. Environmental exposures. So we want to kind of piece that all together.
Hmm.
Then we would work on foundations. So we would, of course, talk about nutrition, and we might start experimenting with specific diets depending on what we found with your history. We would focus on optimizing sleep, reducing stress, gentle movement, or whatever feels right for that person, reducing toxin exposure. We might even do some specialty nutrient testing that I mentioned earlier, just to kind of identify, okay, where is your body at? Like, where are your fuel levels at essentially in your body here?
Hmm.
We might experiment with addressing food triggers. So if someone is sensitive to certain foods, experimenting with kind of having that food group out, or even considering some testing depending on the person. Um, then we might identify any digestive imbalances, and kind of assess their gut microbiome to see if there's anything contributing there. And I often see that can be the case with a lot of my men, especially. And then we would also, depending on what we find from that digestive analysis, which of course, like in the US right now, it's really, really hard for someone to have a completely healthy gut microbiome, just
Right.
with the stress and the stuff in our food system and the toxins are exposed to. Unfortunately, we all need a little love there and a little support. So we would really
Absolutely.
help to replenish and restore the digestive tract to keep it really healthy, because we're seeing so much in the research that our digestion and our gut health is connected to so many different things in our body. So it's
Hmm.
important to kind of make sure that's all looks good. And then finally, if we did remove those triggers, ultimately we want to know, so the food triggers, ultimately we want to know why you're reacting to those foods in the first place.
Hmm.
So eventually we would want to try and reintroduce those foods to see if you have the same reaction. And then dive into that if you are still reacting. And then finally, at the end of this process, we would come up and kind of create a maintenance plan. If you're feeling amazing, great, let's come up with a plan for balance. And if you're not, or you're feeling better, but we still have some more work to do, then we would kind of investigate, okay, what other avenues do we need to look into here? Because there's a lot of other paths we could take from that point.
Sounds like a really comprehensive, tailored approach, absolutely, to an individual, which I think is so important, because you can't hit every nail with the same hammer. That's for darn sure.
Right.
So for our audience listening and watching, I mean, how can they get in touch with you and find you if they find this resonates with them and they might have questions? What's a good way to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way would go to my website at ChristinaStapke.RDN.com. And my last name is spelled Stapke, and my first name is spelled with a CH. And you can, if you just want to kind of talk about what you're dealing with, just to kind of see if it's a good fit to go down this path and start working through that protocol, you can book a brief chat with me and we'll kind of just do a Zoom call and see if we're a good fit.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Christina, thank you so much for all this amazing insight. I know I learned a ton. I'm gonna close out this podcast with something completely unrelated to nutrition or to energy, although it gives me a lot of energy. The title of this podcast is Better Man Clinics, and it's really, the end of the day is just finding your best self, right? And so you've explained to us a journey of how you kind of found your best self in terms of nutrition. But what is the key on a day-to-day basis to living your best life and being your best self?
Yeah, I love that question. The biggest thing that I found that is so helpful for me to recharge and reset and ultimately, help me be successful in my practice and with my patients and with my friends and family is just making time for play and something fun. So, I love surfing and going to the mountains and being outside and just doing something non-work related that's really fun is a game changer. So that's my key.
I think that's a good one. Listen, in this crazy life that we live right now, we often forget that, right? That, just sometimes it's those little things that make all the difference in the world. Well, Christina, thank you again so much for joining us. And for everyone listening, thank you. And remember that your best self is a journey and not a destination. Use every single day to get just a little bit better. We'll see you next time.